Okay. So, all right. We had a minor technical difficulty, and unfortunately, LinkedIn is not working today, but we are live at least on YouTube and Facebook for virtual lunch. And I see we already have a comment. Neil Schwan is here. He is excited to learn about Together Again. Well, we all are anxious to hear more about it. So anyway, we are virtual lunch in the Exhibit Marketers Cafe. I'm Marlis Arnold, and my apologies to anybody who's hopping over to somewhere else that tried to get on LinkedIn. I thought I had it all worked out, and it just didn't cooperate today. So anyway, we are going to talk with Kevin Carty in just a few minutes about Together Again. But as always, I have a few links and some updates and things I want to share first. First of all, and my husband, Alan, is helping behind the scenes. He'll put these links up. The first one I want to share is kind of a clever idea. In Paris, they did on the river, they had a floating movie theater. And so people could watch either from boats or on, on the, I want to say shoreline, but along the edges of the river, on the banks of the river. There we go. That's the word. Anyway, so Alan's going to put that up. I see Rama is here from Lev Promotions in sunny and soon to be hot San Diego. Yeah, so it's not soon to be hot here. It is in Kansas City. Here is that link for the movie theater on the water. I have now, because of audience suggestions and ideas, I have now put all the links, pre-put them in YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube, don't click ahead, but but all the links are there for you in YouTube. They will come up as we go on Facebook. So there's that one. And then also I wanted to share, I thought this was really cool. On Meetings Today, they had a list of 20 meetings and events industry professionals who had really risen to the challenge and done something really cool and, moved things forward and done something innovative. So here is that link. So you can read about the 20 trendsetters in the meetings and events industry. So I think it's always good that we keep focusing on, because I saw a quote the other day. Let's see if I think I wrote it down. Oh yeah. I love this. Everybody has to innovate. Those who innovate best succeed. And I thought that was a really good quote, because that's what we've all got to do right now. We've all got to innovate. That's what Together Again Expo was all about, was innovating and experimenting and trying new things. So I thought that was really cool. The Expo Group has put together a PDF of some ideas of floor plans and possible new looks. Some of these you may have seen before. Some of them I thought were really cool and again, very innovative. And so it'll be interesting to see how things come together in the meetings of the future. So here is the link. And then on that page, there is a link to click to download the PDF. So I recommend you go take a look at that, get some new ideas. Court Furniture has also put out some things. I think we shared in one of the lunches last month, we shared a link for some of their ideas, proposed ideas. The other thing that's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of new etiquette and things and changes. I did a blog and podcast episode last month on adapting exhibits for the future, for the near future. And so Alan's going to put up that link in a second. I see Patty Shaughnessy's here from very hot Philadelphia. I like your avatar, by the way, your mask wearers. So here's the link to the Trade Show Insights episode on adapting exhibits. So, but some of the things are like, booth behavior is going to have to change. And Kevin's going to talk about that. The layout of the booth is going to need to change. Lots of different things are going to be different as we go forward. And so we're going to need to learn to adapt. Okay, we got some other people weighing in, saying hi. Marco is here from Italy. Some of you remember Marco was our guest, I think a couple months ago now. And then we've got Chris Griffin from Crew XP. So welcome, everybody. Oh, and he is from Orlando, so I know he was at the show too. And then we've got Chuck here from Elite Expo. Chuck is another one of our regulars, so good to have you here too. So this is fun. It's great. I know we took a 2-week break, which for me didn't really feel like a break because I didn't end up being a vacation. I was still working on things, but I missed everybody. And it's so great to see everybody back again. I look forward to these Tuesdays. I hope you do too. And Matthew's here from Champion Logistics. And yeah, so I think we're all anxious to hear how the expo went. So I'm not going to take too much longer here, but I do have just a few more things. I came across this really interesting article about social distancing rule breakers. And it for all of you like sciencey kind of geek nerds like me, I kind of like the whole psychology and behind the scenes things. It was really interesting because not surprisingly, they said, like narcissists will have real problems with it, or people who lack empathy or, aren't terribly socially adept. So it was really an interesting article to read. Alan and I talk about, we know some people who are what we call close talkers, and those people are going to have a hard time with it. So it'll be interesting to hear Kevin's perspective of now being in this environment if there was a lot of those kinds of issues. Gina is here from Optima. And yes, I know, Gina, you were there because I saw you on camera when Kevin walked around. So yeah, so it's really great to hear, we've got some people who were there and then a lot of us who weren't, who maybe attended virtually. I do want to share just a couple other quick links. The event manager blog did, and I think I've shared this one before, but it's a good resource to keep bookmarked if you don't already. It's the guide to reopening events, and it lists by country and by state. So because it is ever changing, so it's really helpful to have that as a resource that you can turn back to and, keep checking. So Alan is going to put that one up here. There we go. So it looks like it's coming from me, but it's really Alan doing it behind the scenes. So anyway, so there's that one. And then businesses are eager to return to events. TSNN did an article about that. Oh, and yeah, Larry, unfortunately, yeah, LinkedIn did not cooperate. This was our first time trying to do LinkedIn, and it didn't like me this morning. So, we'll try again in the future, but for right now, yeah, we're just back to the 2. Okay, so businesses are eager to return. So this is an article. They've done a study, and so businesses were talking about how not being able to go to trade shows has affected their marketing. And being in this industry, we kind of tend to think that's like, oh, everybody's struggling as much as we are. There are some companies that are out there that are still going strong and they're trying to promote their businesses. So, trying to find ways to do that. And then the last one that I want to share before we bring Kevin on is from MeetingsNet. This is about, will there have to be waivers for events in the future and how will that look? And this is an article by the industry attorney, Joshua Grimes, which probably a lot of you are familiar with. So it's, it's a good thing to just kind of keep in mind. I know Kevin has already told me they didn't have to sign waivers for Together Again, but it'll be interesting to see how that happens as we go forward. So anyway, now that I got through all of those things, I want to just bring Kevin on. This is Kevin Carty from Classic Exhibits. And Kevin was there. He was one of the exhibitors. And I know he's been doing the circuit here. He's been doing lots and lots of interviews. So some of you may have seen him before on another podcast somewhere. But Kevin, start out. Oh,
sorry.
That's somebody else calling for an interview.
All right.
So let's start out and talk about just your travel. What was it like? I know you said you were nervous going in, but what was it about the travel that made you feel better along the way?
Sure. Going into it, I've traveled countless times, obviously, in this business, and going into it, I was kind of surprised at the level of anxiety I had getting on the plane for the first time. But and I know that what I'm about to say is not necessarily true for everybody, but for me, Alaska Airlines was who I ended up flying with, and it was fantastic. They did a really good job, not just at the Portland airport, but I had to catch a connecting flight in Seattle and then had an overnight flight from there. But really managing the space, that made me feel good within their terminal area. But really, when we got on the plane, that was where it kicked in. They had masks for people if you needed them, gave you stuff to wipe down your seat and take care of everything, take care of your space. But probably the most interesting part to me, and they keep the middle seats open, which was great. But probably the most interesting thing to me was, and I learned on another call that maybe this isn't on all their flights, but it certainly was on mine. Was we were informed that if we needed anything from the overhead, we just hit the call button, and they would actually come and get it and bring it down so that you could get your stuff out.
Smart.
And the idea there was they really just wanted to limit the number of people that were up and around in the plane, especially on a flight that was 5.5 hours long overnight. So that was great. That made me feel better. I've joked with people before, getting into Orlando, I think there was sort of a sense maybe nationally that, the second you get off a plane in Orlando that there's, people are just sort of willy-nilly roaming around having COVID block parties. And that really was not the case. It was very much the same at the Orlando airport. When I got to my car rental, it was already there. There's really no exchanging of information. Everything was done through the app. And hopped in the car. The car definitely smelled like it had just been cleaned. So I had to have the windows down for a while, but that again made me feel better, knowing that they had taken that precaution. And then getting to the hotel, the hotel was fantastic. And I found out that this is kind of the same thing at most hotels, but definitely at all Marriott hotels, when you go in, there's a one-way entrance in, which was great. They were only allowing 2 people in the main lobby at a time, one person who was checking in, or group, let me put it that way. I was a single. So, but once someone was checked in and they moved away, so I was waited outside, and then the doors are locked. They have to let you in.
Oh, wow.
Until you get your key. But then even after you have your key, that's still the only entrance that works. You can exit out of any of the exits in the building, but you can't get back in. And then the elevators, which, they can do this now because they're limiting their capacity in most cases to about 50%. But again, made me feel better. The elevators were one group at a time. So if I was a single, it was just me on the elevator and then take me up, and then I'd have to go back down. The next person would have to wait. And that felt good too. Walking into the room was it had just been, you could definitely tell it had been deep cleaned because you could smell it. So had to open the windows a little bit, but again, even though I had to kind of air the place out, it still made me feel a lot better. And by the time I was there, it was like, okay, this is kind of business as usual, which is good, with the exception that you've got a mask on, everybody's managing their distance, and then I felt a lot better, not really knowing what to expect going in.
Well, and we've got a question from Teresa. How important was your smartphone in creating and participating in contactless interactions? I mean, sounds like you had some contact there in the hotel when you were checking in, so you weren't doing that necessarily DIY check-in?
Well, no, actually it kind of was. So, let me say this, as an avid concert goer, one of the greatest things Ticketmaster ever did a few years ago was putting your tickets directly into your Apple, into your wallet on your phone or onto your Android. So the airline was obviously the same way. The car rental was the same way. And then the hotel was even the same way. So when I did get there, I'd already checked in. They'd send me a notification, and I went through the check-in process, and it put the information directly into the wallet on my phone. So when I got there, all I actually had to do was show them my phone. I didn't have to, touch or do anything. The hotel I was at was a Marriott Town Place Suites. They do not have the electronic keys on phones, so I did get keys. So in that sense, I was, I had some contact in that they handed me my keys.
Okay. Well, now let's transition over and start talking about setting up for the expo and what was that like? What was the back of house like, and those kinds of things?
Sure. So during setup, they actually have the entrance for setup was at the back of house. We were in the West Hall at the convention center, and where that parking lot is, we kind of crossed over, and they had this table set up right there for us outside the gates where you did your initial heat check, and they checked everybody's forehead. You had to have masks on. They all had masks on. Did the heat check, and then if you passed that, you got a sticker. Sticker said, "I am cool." And then you made your way in, and it was 200-300 yards across, and we went in through our entrance into the hall was through the freight doors, and walking onto the show floor. Number one, just felt awesome because it's been too long, and it was just nice to see. But I mean, the overabundance of signage was crazy, and I've said this before to some other people. In normal days, I mean, it was overkill. But in where we're at currently, I think this is the way it needs to be, and I think it's the way it will be for some time moving forward. But whether there were stand-up signs, directional signage on the floor, hand sanitizers that also had signs on them, overhead signage. I mean, there was everywhere from the back of house all the way onto the setup floor. There was signage leading the way, reminding you about your mask, talking about the sort of COVID specific rules and the social distancing guidelines for the event. And this was on setup day. So now you imagine when we got to the day of the show, it was 4 times that. So in the way of signage. So they did a fantastic job of really setting the tone, whether it was on setup day or you were an attendee on the day of the show of hey, these are the rules and this is what's expected.
Well, and you were talking about all the signage and everything. It was interesting. I just read about a show in Australia that had what they called social distancing ambassadors. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that I don't know that that's really a job that I would want to have. Did they have a lot of trouble with people that were, either not wearing their mask or not distancing, or were there very many issues with that, or was everybody pretty compliant?
I'll break that up into 2. On setup day, people were mostly compliant. There were a couple incidences where I saw people being asked a couple different times to, hey, remember, you got to have your mask on. And one person who was kind of pitching a fit about it, but for besides that, everybody else was like, yeah, okay, totally. And my favorite story is, and if you've ever seen the meme, I know that's exactly where this lady got it from, which made me laugh because I saw her do it 3 or 4 different times. But there was a gal from the Orange County Convention Center who was walking around, and sometimes especially it was hot in there, if your mask was slipping down, she was walking around and she was like, hey, your wiener's hanging out. And people were like, oh, whoops, put the mask back up over their nose, which was pretty funny. But everybody really, during setup, kept their distance. I didn't see a whole lot of issues there. It was interesting watching that setup happen. Our booth went up rather quickly, and as I kind of walked around and noticed that people were keeping to their own booth. I mean, it's hard because if you've been in this industry for any amount of time, you've built these friendships and that go beyond even business. And so that was, you mentioned close talkers. I'm not necessarily a close talker, but I am a hugger, and that natural impulse when you see somebody, you're kind of like, oh, that's right. That was I recognized in myself, I had to check myself as a handful of different times when I saw people.
I know. And I think that would be my hardest thing too, because it is like one big reunion. Every time we go to one of these shows, it's like you see all these friends and everybody's hugging, and just to try to restrain from that. I did see a photo somebody shared on social media where they had taken like paint sticks and put paper cutout hands, and so they were doing the distance high five.
I'm trying to remember who did that, which exhibitor, but they did a great job. So you had this you could high five, and I saw people giving each other little elbow bumps and stuff. But like I said, for the most part, and I don't mean to jump too far ahead, but the greatest evidence of that to us was on the actual day of the event, because I noticed people were really respectful of the space. So when they came up to the booth, whether we knew them for a long period of time or it was the first time we'd ever met these folks, people were definitely standing on the aisle. And I had several people and asked, hey, can I come in and take a look? 'Cause we had some things on the flat screen, and people were really respectful to ask that first and make sure that we were comfortable. And then that way we could make room. We had 3 people there, but most of the time there was only 1 or 2 of us in the booth, and others were, we were roaming around or doing other things. But that was nice to see that. And then people would wait in the aisle for sort of their turn until that other person was done, and then they would out, and the next person could come up and come in.
Rama has a question. Did they have an outdoor area designated as mask-free and set up for social distancing like Disney World does, so people could get out from behind the masks for a bit? That's a really good question.
That's a great question. And, Rama, I don't know. Number one, because I didn't go outside during setup or during the day of the event. So I couldn't tell you. I can tell you that where you entered on the day of the event, and again, went through another heat check, it was a long walk. I mean, then, you had to make your way through actually a infrared station. Even after you already did your forehead check, you had to go through an infrared station, then you went up an escalator, then you had kind of a long walk. So I don't know the answer to that question. And, once you were in, I can say during the show, the day of the show, and we were there from, 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning until 6:30 at night, doing teardown and whatnot. It was quite a bit of different experience than during setup, where there was no air conditioning. So It really wasn't as bad. It was hot. I will tell you, the masks are hot. And ironically, just food for thought, but the masks that are actually the best, in my opinion, are still the medical masks, the blue medical masks people wear. They definitely gave more of a. It was less hot with those on versus some of the other masks out there.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that. Alan, I'm going to have you go ahead and put up in the background the link for Together Again, and then also the link for the replay. And I do want to share we'll get into the virtual side of things in just a little bit, but on the replay, if you haven't watched it yet, I've got a few little cheat codes for you here. About the first 30 minutes is opening acts. So you can watch all the musical acts or kind of skip through like what I did. I didn't actually watch the whole day straight through. But the first panel, which was really good, starts around an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes in. So if you want to, jump to that, I mean, they started with the mayor did a greeting first, and then I think they have some interviews. They did some different interviews around the show floor, but Kevin did a much better video we'll talk about in a second. At 3.5 hours in is a chef demo, which was really interesting to see how food process is changing, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And then David Dubois did a really great presentation on basically the future of events, and that's at about 5 hours in. It's all one big long Vimeo. So so there is the Vimeo of the whole 7.5 hours or whatever. So, but it was on the virtual side, and I know the whole point of this was to get people together physically. But for those of us who were attending virtually, and I know because I heard this from a lot of different virtual attendees, we felt very left out of things. You know, we saw all the sessions. That was great. But your walk around the show floor was really about the only look. I mean, they did some exhibitor interviews, but we really didn't see the show floor and really get a feel for things. So, and Alan will put up that link as well. I think, is that the YouTube link that we already have there? Maybe, of Kevin's? I'll put it up. I think that's probably it. But you did a really good job with your walk around. So tell us a little bit more about the show floor itself.
Sure. And, you know, before I say that, you know, the feedback on the virtual side, totally get it. You know, it was the first time, you know, I just said to people is I think there's a healthy dose of grace that is deserved here as well, from the standpoint of this is the first event. And, you know, what Alliance Exposition did, what the Yiska family did, in conjunction with the Orange County Convention Center, who gave the space for free, should be overwhelmingly commended. As I know you said, my friend Chris Griffin's on this call, but he put it best in a conversation I was having with him. We're in an industry right now that's like a coma patient, and they have come in to try to breathe some life in. And the goal of this event was to show that we can have events in a safe manner. Granted, it was on a small scale. It was the first time out. And then putting the virtual element on there, which is obviously going to be a component for all shows moving forward, probably into the future. I think everybody agrees. It definitely needs work. I don't think anybody would deny that. So I think out of all the virtual exhibits, even there was really only one that had a meaningful exhibit. And so that's something that can be worked on and will be, I know, for shows ahead. But they did a fantastic job, and this is a leap of faith, and no one else was stepping out doing this, so I commend them. The show floor itself, though, specifically, what I really loved when you walked in was, again, when you think about this from, you know, what we typically do at a show, there's a lot of conversations that sidebar conversations that can't necessarily happen in your booth space like they normally would. Not just because you're in an inline, but even if you were in an island and you're trying to manage space between people. What they really did a great job of is when you walked in, there was a large open area where there were some islands surrounding it and whatnot that was perfect for networking for people, because you could keep your space. You didn't have to be next to other groups. So that was fantastic. Those initial aisles were much wider, probably twice the size of normal aisles. Get asked this question a lot when, you know, we did get out to the external aisles. Were they any wider? No, they were actually still 10-foot aisles, but they were meant to be one directional. And you talk about
I saw in your video how well that worked, though.
Yeah, right. I even walked down one the wrong way. One of the suggestions that in sort of a post-show conversation with the Alliance group that I had made was the signage on the floor was amazing. But rarely in a trade show are we looking down at the floor, because our eyes are gazing on the sort of the eye candy of the exhibits that are on the left and the right of you. So getting those directional signage elements up higher, maybe even on the aisle banners, would have helped.
People don't look at those either, though.
Yeah.
I'm thinking stanchions, like at the end of each aisle, like a big arrow, like the whole stanchion is just a cutout of an arrow pointing the direction, would probably be the least likely to be overlooked.
Yeah, I think that could very much help. Something to be done a little bit differently there, certainly. And then what you mentioned was sort of having, and I hate to put it this way, but kind of like hall monitors. I think it would be, you know, beneficial for shows moving forward to have those ambassadors or monitors, whatever, who are just, you know, kindly reminding people and walking around that, you know, to kind of follow the direction. at the end of the day, it's actually beneficial to the exhibitor, in my opinion, because you're going to get more eyes on your booth because people are going to be forced to go, down each row in order to get to another one. So I guess the bigger the show, that might be it proves even more challenging, but definitely something to think about moving forward. People were engaged. People were staying as you walk down the booth or walk down the aisles. People were manning their booths, but not necessarily jumping out in the aisles like normal and having a lot of conversations. Mm-hmm. But again, why I think one-way aisles are critical is, as I said, a lot of people were being respectful of that space. And so you imagine if you've got 3 or 4 people in front of your booth having a conversation, and then across aisle, you've got 3 or 4 people in front of that booth having a conversation. Then, if there isn't one-way traffic or there's two-way traffic, I did see one thing I will say, I did see a lot of people who were at least standing and waiting for a conversation to end, for space to clear, and then they made their way through, which was nice. But, the energy was good. None of us really thought that we were going to be, walking out of there with, 150 leads for, 200,000 or $2 million worth of sales. Everybody was there with a clear notion and passion for being a part of how we could make one of these, make a live event happen in a safe way.
Well, and Teresa has a good question. Can you describe the overall in-person experience as an attendee? Was it utilitarian, elation? What was the attendee reaction?
I think you had, I'll carve it up this way. 75% of the people that were there were just so excited to be there. So elation. Walking around, enjoying, even seeing people that they didn't know, just being on the show floor and seeing how things are being done. It was a real positive. I think you did have probably 25% of people there that were not looking for a problem at all, not suggesting that, but they definitely had a critical eye on, what are they doing here? How do they, a lot of people that stood back during the keynote sessions or the breakout sessions in the back, really that first one kind of monitoring, like when the mayor was speaking, and I saw people kind of looking and seeing if, how they had the seating set up, which was fantastic. It actually worked out really well. Checking out the food area and seeing kind of how they were handling that, and were people, monitoring their space in line. And if they weren't, this is one thing that I really wanted to point out is, if they weren't, either someone from Alliance or someone from Orange County Convention Center was there to say something. And those two organizations worked perfectly in tandem. You could see that they were a perfect partnership for pulling this off and making sure that people were kind of minding their P's and Q's.
Well, and Ramah brings up a good point here. Do we really think signage on aisle directions is what's causing people to go the wrong way? People ignore signs because they want to get to something they see or know is in that aisle and don't want to be bothered going out of their way to get there. It's, I can see it, I'm just going to go get it thing. And I think, and that's one thing we don't know yet, because there have been a few other shows taking place, but I'm guessing this show, most people were on their best behavior because, everybody had a vested interest in seeing it go well. But I'm thinking when we start getting to just your regular run-of-the-mill trade shows, we might start getting into more attendee behavior issues, should we say?
Could be. It totally could be. And I reminded several people, and I know others were doing the exact same thing, which is, we're on camera. And, there was a section above the hall where if you looked up, there was these big glass pane windows. There was cameras on us the entire event.
Wow.
And so it was I kind of remind some people if maybe they were, chatting a little too closely or whatnot, especially if I knew them, it'd be like,
you're being watched.
Right, this is important, and it is. It's very important.
Yeah. And Chris brings up a good point. Many attendees seemed curious to investigate what the new process would be like. There were representatives from Hilton, Hyatt, Sheraton, and Wyndham in attendance. And I think that's a lot of who was there from what I've seen and what I've heard. I think it was a lot of people checking it out, trying to figure out how they're going to do their own events. So it really was a giant laboratory experiment basically.
It was, and Chris really points something out, which is, I think, a leading indicator. You look at those folks that were there, in particular the ones that he named out. In all likelihood, guys, we're going to be seeing a lot of smaller regional shows for the foreseeable future, right? And so this was a great way for them to walk around and see what some people were doing from technology side. I mean, people had things to show too. Don't get me wrong.
Yes.
But also to kind of just see how the show could be done in maybe one of their venues, which is going to be, prime property for some of these smaller events coming up.
Well, and that's the thing, I guess, too, on the virtual side of the expo, I would have liked to have had more of a behind the scenes peek at some of the technology. Like I saw the, and I don't know the proper terms, but the disinfecting tunnel. Uh-huh. I mean, I don't know what they call it, but that I thought was interesting. Would have liked to know more about that. They also, I know they had the meeting pods, which of course we've seen like at exhibitor show and things like that. Sure. But I thought this is when it's like, when there's something that comes out that's kind of like, oh yeah, that's clever. But then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, we really need this. And so did you see where those meeting pods, were those utilized very much?
Yeah, I think they were. Every time I walked by, there was people that were having meetings there. The only change that they made to them, which was really smart, was they put an acrylic divider across I called them booths, but in between the folks. One of the things that virtual folks didn't see either, which could be done in a video fashion or something, but I think is pretty important, is they didn't see that after setup was done, that whole show hall was cleaned and it was fogged. Instead of setting off a fog like you do in your bomb in your house, these were machines that they went down the aisle with, and they sprayed all the booths. And I've joked about it. Never I've been so happy to walk into my booth space the next morning and find a little bit of film on our counter. But also they had these really simple little signs that said, this booth had been cleaned or been sanitized.
Yeah.
So when you came in, you knew that had happened. Those are things that weren't necessarily visible to the virtual folks as well.
Oh, and Alan, I want you to put up we should have one more link there. I wanted to share the link to the Women in Exhibitions virtual booth, which again, on the expo side, I went to the virtual expo and tried to check out the show floor. I didn't really see a lot of virtual booths, but this one was well done. Happened to be done by Classic Exhibits, but it was a well done example of what a virtual booth could be like. Just clickable and simple, not overly highly techy, but it was just, moving forward, there's so many things that are going to need to happen. And like we talked about, one of those is getting more of a virtual component for the people who can't be there in person. And, I know one last thing I want to talk about real quick. I know there's some other cities that are on the slate for possible Together Again Expos. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I know there's lots of cities in consideration right now. I think the idea is, it would be, the end goal would be, it would be great to get, 8, 9 more of these done before the end of the year. Vegas has been talked about, Dallas, Washington, D.C., Nashville, Atlantic City, which seems kind of an odd location to some people, but it is well located. None of us necessarily like AC, but part of it is finding a good location so that people can regionally get there, whether they want to drive or take short flights, but they can limit their exposure. And also venues in cities that want them.
Right.
And, that's not necessarily always the case. And then even beyond that, it's not just that a venue necessarily wants you, but is a venue going to participate in the guidelines as far as having everything cleaned and
well, are they GBAC certified?
Yeah, I mean, then that's always going to be a question as well, as more venues are getting that certification.
Well, I want to check and see if anybody has any last minute questions. Go ahead and post those. But Kevin, I want to thank you. I know like I said, you've been doing a lot of these interviews and sharing a lot about your experience. So we appreciate you being our ambassador on the floor, as it were, and really reporting back and helping everybody see through your eyes what the Together Again Expo was like. And I know I know it was a success from the standpoint of the exhibitors and the people who were there. And so I hope that, that they're, like you said, there's a few things that they've learned for future expos that they're going to do maybe a little bit differently. But I know that this, would you say, exceeded expectations?
I think it definitely exceeded expectations. I mean, just the overall virtual attendance again was there was challenges there, and those can be fixed and worked upon. But it certainly exceeded my expectations, our company's expectations, and everybody that I talked to who was there. It's people are passionate about wanting to get back to face to face. 2 seconds, but you look at the results or the feedback from many of the events that have happened only in a virtual fashion right now, and it is 10 out of 10 people that you talk to that will tell you this is never going to replace face-to-face interactions with people. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a great add-on to a face-to-face event, but it's critical that we continue to try to push and find ways to get people to see that these can happen in a safe manner.
Yeah. And looks like we got Neil in there twice. Yeah, and that's true. The virtual component could be elevated to a much higher level if a platform would donate space for use. Well, that's true, because a lot of these virtual platforms are not cheap. People tend to think that's like, oh, it's virtual, it costs a whole lot less. Well, not necessarily based on some of them. But I'm also finding that there are a lot of ways to get creative in any kind of platform and be more interactive in a virtual platform. I mean, that's what I've been spending months working on myself, is developing tips and tools and best practices for virtual. So if anybody has questions on that, let me know.
Keep in mind, I want to say one thing about that. Keep in mind, the platform is part of it, but oftentimes the platforms are not. The platforms are great for the holistic event and doing 90% of what's going on in the event. But what the platforms don't typically address very well is the expo floor and the exhibit spaces themselves. And
right.
So that's where I think in tandem there's got to be some more. Even if somebody were to donate the platform, you still need to work with somebody who understands how to do a virtual exhibit. That's not classic just alone. I mean, there's hundreds of us out there that can do this and really help our end clients exhibit in a meaningful way.
Well, and that's the thing. Like I said, it doesn't matter what the platform is. You can get creative. I've seen things done on very simple platforms that were very creative and very interactive, but it comes down, like you said, to the exhibitor level. And so that's what I'm working to do, is help the exhibitors get more innovative and get more creative. So, and there'll be more coming on that down the road. I'm working on some special tools, but we got one more comment here from Marco, and then I think we will wrap up. So some in-person events are reopening in Europe in September. It'll be interesting to see. Yeah, and Marco, we hope you will keep us updated. We may even bring you back on as a guest in the future to give us the insights from Europe. But again, thank you, Kevin. Thanks to everyone who joined. I know we went a little long today, but we had a lot to share. And we are a resilient industry, and we will be back, and we will do it safely. So thanks, Kevin. And we will see everybody next week for virtual lunch. Until then, bye.